is the Deputy Project Manager for LSST data management and also the manager of the pipeline effort. So John knows all there is to know about what we're doing with the software and especially the algorithmic science pipelines part.
All right, good morning, everybody. Thanks, Mario. Mario's told you a little bit about who I am. I must admit, I know very little about who most of you are. So what I'm aiming to do here is I'm assuming that some part of the audience knows all there is to know about LSST. Some part of the audience knows probably very little. So I'm going to kind of take it from the ground up, just give you a really quick overview of LSST, and then show you lots of neat pictures of where we are in construction and all the exciting progress that's being made. So let me start with just the really view from 10,000 feet overview of what LSST is. And so despite the name, Large Synoptic Survey Telescope, it is not really just a telescope. I would think of it as an integrated survey system, which the Wide Field Survey Telescope is a part, but also the world's biggest digital camera, combined with a sort of completely automatic operations system. But we're using that to carry out this decade-long survey. The end result of that is not just the survey itself, but we will produce fully reduced data products, which we'll make available to the community, and will provide the community not just with those data products, but an interactive data and access and analysis environment to enable people to get their science out. So when you take all of that as a package, that is LSST. It's not just the kind of a lump of hardware and the mirrors. As you know, the PDF didn't really work so well there. But as you know, the aim of the game is the so-called the Deep Wide Fast Survey. So this is starting in 2022. So we are about 4 years out from the start of LSST operations, running for 10 years, surveying the 18,000 plus square degrees of the southern sky. I should add, this image here is a kind of notional LSST observing strategy. This is not the real thing, which, as you're no doubt aware, is still very much being developed. This is just an example from an old paper. But it shows the basic idea that we're tiling out the southern sky. We're hitting a bunch of areas like these dark blobs here are deep drilling fields where we'll zoom in particular areas and go really deep. We'll carry out mini surveys covering things like the galactic plane. And the basic idea is that for every point on the sky, we will visit it for 30 seconds. We call that a visit when we observe one point for 30 seconds total. Over the course of 10 years, we'll visit every point in the sky, a total of about 825 times. We have 6 different filters. The number of visits varies from kind of 50 to 200 or so per filter. That'll get us in a single visit, we'll hit an R-band magnitude of about 24.5. When we co out all the data over 10 years, we'll get to an R about 27.5. So this is a pretty deep survey, but it's also a pretty wide survey. And one of the key drivers that this puts on the LSST as a project is the idea that the telescope itself has to be fast and nimble. All our software, all our hardware has to be capable of supporting operations that actually drive us towards delivering the survey. So having given you the kind of the big picture, what I want to do now is walk through each of the 4 major subsystems that we talk about as making up LSST, and just give you a kind of a taster of what it is they're doing and the progress that they've made to date. Because I hope you'll agree with me that it's starting to look pretty cool. The first one, of course, is the telescope and sites subsystem. So this is actually building the telescope, which we'll did kind of on the summit of the mountain in Chile. Since I joined the project several years ago, we've kind of been showing this rendering to people. This is circa 2012. This is what LSST was going to look like. Circa a couple of months ago, this is what LSST actually does look like. And this is kind of mind-blowing for me that suddenly this project that we've been talking about for all these years is actually real. It's actually it makes the whole thing seem kind of really pressing, and it makes it really exciting. The stuff that we've been working on for so long is really starting to come together. So in fact, this building on the summit was actually completed in March 2018. And as you can see, the dome there is still obviously very much under construction, but that's due to be finished later in this year. The dome itself is, of course, not much use without a kind of telescope to go in it. So this is what we call the telescope mount assembly. This is a really awesome piece of hardware because this is kind of 300 tons of metal, and it's going to move. And because we're so concerned about the survey cadence and about doing things fast, it's going to move fast. This will support 300 tons of metal moving at 10 degrees per second of rotation and accelerating at 10 degrees per second squared. This has been under construction in Spain. This is photo in April, it actually looks like there was, until I converted this into a PDF, a rendering to show what the plan was. You could compare it with the picture. But this looks, again, like one of those renderings that we've been showing off for years, and suddenly there it is. It's a lump of hardware with people climbing on it and sitting in a factory somewhere. This is, as I say, it's currently in Spain, but is assembly on the mountain starting late in this year. So again, this is coming, and it's not so far off now. Telescope's not much good without mirrors. You possibly know something about the LSST optical arrangement, but basically we have this modified Paul Baker design where M1 and M3 are really a single piece of glass. So you've got one radius of curvature on the outside and then another radius of curvature on the inside of this single 8.4 meter mirror. This was actually polished early in the project. So this was polished in 2014, but they're now taking that and integrating it with the whole mirror assembly in Tucson. That's going on this year. By mid-2019, that should be on that telescope on the top of the mountain. This is M2, so up there in the optical design, and this is currently sitting in the vendor who's been manufacturing it, but that is due to ship from the vendor in October of this year. LSST is kind of its little secret is that there is not one telescope, but there's actually two. So this is the auxiliary telescope. This is a 1.2 meter telescope that will sit in its own dome on the mountain next to LSST. So this is a rendering of the Oxtel dome next to the LSST dome. In fact, the Oxtel dome now exists, so we no longer need to use a rendering for this. I could stick a photo in here if I had one. This will kind of trail the 8.4 meter around the sky during operations. We'll be using it to do spectrophotometric measurements of stars to characterize atmospheric absorption, and then we feed that into the LSST calibration system. The telescope is, as of a couple of months ago, this is it sitting on the mountain in its dome. The spectrograph is in the lab in Tucson, where it's still being tested. We expect that system to get first light early next year, early 2019. And then that should be entering kind of regular operations by the middle of next year. We'll be regularly processing data coming off that. Of course, all of this telescope hardware is not much use without a camera. The LSST camera, the punchline is always the biggest digital camera in the world. And it is pretty big. It's the size of a car, weighs about 3 tons. 3.2 gigapixels. That means when you read it out, you get a total of about 7.2 gigabytes on each exposure. And it reads out fast with a 2-second readout. Again, so much of what is being built is designed to support this efficient survey strategy. The focal plane for the camera is it's a 63 centimeter diameter focal plane. It consists of 189 separate CCDs like this, which are packed into rafts of 3x3 detectors. And then we have 21 of those rafts on the focal plane to give us a total of 189 science CCDs, plus tucked in the corners of these you can't see are guider and wavefront sensor CCDs. Each of those detectors is 4K by 4K pixels, and it supports this 2-second readout time. And these are kind of arranged on these rafts, which have their own electronic system in the back per raft. And that means we can effectively operate each raft as its own little independent camera. And that kind of becomes important in a minute, so bear with me. Those sensors are being fabricated by 2 vendors. So there's the picture of the sensors from each vendor here. They look slightly, I'm not sure if you can tell in this projector, but they look slightly different color, but that's just an effect of the anti-reflective coating. In fact, they have remarkably similar performance from the 2 different vendors. Procurement of sensors is almost complete. There's actually 242 sensors have been accepted, at least as of the time I stole this slide. You will note that that's more than 189 science sensors on the focal plane, but that includes reserves, it includes other sensors for other purposes and so on as well. Those sensors are being tested and accepted at Brookhaven National Lab, and then they're being shipped to SLAC, where they're being assembled into rafts. There are 10 of the science rafts that have now been assembled and accepted, And we expect all of them on the current schedule to be ready by January of next year. Of course, just having CCDs is not much use without the optics. These are also coming together. These are, as you can see in these pictures here, huge lumps of glass. This is L1, so the front lens on the camera. I've labeled them on the diagram here. As you can see, it's nicely bigger than this person who's inspecting it apparently from behind. The lenses are polished and accepted for coding. Well, L1 and L2 are polished and accepted for coding. L3 is currently being polished. Coding is expected mid-2018, so any minute now. And our filters are currently in production. So as I said, you can kind of take one of those science rafts of 9 CCDs and run it as if it was its own little digital camera. Little, it's 116 megapixels or something. And this is exactly what we're going to do. So one of the first parts of commissioning the LSST system is to build what we call the commissioning camera, which is a single raft of the full LSST camera. And we will put this on the telescope in mid next year, as we saw all those kind of bits of hardware arriving over the next year or so. And they kind of culminate in getting a commissioning camera on the telescope, and we can start using that for system integration and early commissioning. And so we will be taking data really quite soon with the commissioning camera before we then transition into kind of a more full-blown commissioning and then operations with the full LSST camera. And so this is, again, ComCam is on track for January 2019 delivery. And as you can see, there's lots of lumps of hardware already sitting in labs, or people are putting this together.
Hey, John. Sorry, can I ask a question?
Go for it.
Do you know if
What do you mean by science?
Wow.
We will do, there will be science verification surveys carried out with ComCam. But I think we will, I suspect, I mean, if Leanne was here, she would give you the official policy, but I suspect we will not be publishing science results from ComCam.
But is that we as an LSST project, or we as everybody? Because I could see a lot of data in ComCam.
I suspect that is we as in everybody. But there is a document which is the LSST data access policy, which is this close to being released and laying down the law on this. So yeah, I'm nervous about trying to lay down the law myself. Yeah. But that policy is coming. It's really close. So the most interesting part, of course, in my entirely unbiased opinion of the whole thing, is the data management system for LSST. So data management is the software and the compute systems that effectively take all the data that comes out of the back of the telescope and turns it into things that you can use to do science. So, and this was a kind of nice animation until I made it a PDF, and that's kind of disappointing. But we're getting 20 terabytes of raw data a night off this impressive telescope and camera that we've just been talking about. We're taking that and we're doing two things with it. We're turning it into what we call prompt data products. So prompt data products are data processing that happens during the night, or as the Solar System Science Collaboration is obviously aware, during kind of the following day. We're turning this into the alert stream that Leanne is going to tell you a little bit about tomorrow now, I guess. Averaging 10 million alerts per night on everything that's transient and variable. And we have this latency guarantee that those alerts will be out within 60 seconds of the shutter closing. We're also making annual data releases. These will come in, there'll actually be 11 data releases in 10 years, because we'll do a first release with the first 6 months of data, so it's kind of almost annual. At the end of 10 years, the final data release is a 15 petabyte science catalog, plus hundreds of petabytes of image data will also be included in those data releases. And they will give you really exquisite characterization, depending on if you're interested in kind of the non-prompt, either static sky or kind of longer-term variability science. And to make it possible to access all this stuff, we're building what we call the LSST Science Platform. So the Science Platform is designed to make it possible for astronomers to get to grips with the kind of mountain of data that LSST is throwing at you. We'll talk about three aspects to this. We have the portal. So the portal is the web-based front end that you can kind of rock up to the portal You can browse the databases, you can run some queries, you can make some visualizations. You can do all that in a kind of nice, friendly web environment. When you want to kind of dig in a little bit deeper, we're providing Jupyter-style notebooks running directly in LSST data centers that you can log in, you can use our code, and you can use your own code within the notebook to actually process LSST data for yourself. And then finally, we're providing web APIs based on virtual observatory standards, so internationally agreed and standardized ways of accessing data. So you can bring your own kind of your external tooling using standardized ways of accessing and dealing with LSST data. You can plug them right into our data access centers. The important bit, or like perhaps the key outcome of all of LSST is the data products. And this is in some sense why we're all here. So what are we talking about in terms of LSST data products? Well, we're talking about a stream of, the prompt data products, stream of 10 million time domain events per night, detected and transmitted to event distribution networks within 60 seconds of the observation, and a catalog of orbits for 6 million solar system bodies. Annual data releases will give you a catalog in the end of 37 billion objects, that's about 20 billion galaxies and 17 billion stars. They're comprised of about 30 trillion separate measurements on those objects. We produce these data releases annually, and we make them accessible to online databases. And of course, we also provide not just the catalogs, but the deep images that we've used to generate them. And then we support the idea of user-generated data products, and we'll provide services and computing resources at the data access centers to enable user-specified custom processing and analysis. And of course, you get access to all the code that we're using. All the data management code is explicitly open source. You can use it, and we'll encourage you to use it. So why is this a big deal? In some sense, the question we may have, fine, that sounds great, but people have been doing these big surveys for the last, many years. This is an image from SDSS, Lupton et al. 2004. It looks nice. There's some astronomy there. It's pretty cool. And then you realize that the point with LSST is it's a horrible cliche. It's just a paradigm shift in terms of what the data looks like. So this is an image from Hypersuprime Cam on the Subaru telescope. This is a PSF matched coag, which is going to approximately the full LSST depth. HSC is in some ways a similar kind of instrument to LSST with a much smaller field of view and a kind of less ambitious survey program. But when you look at this, and in particularly when you look at this with my kind of data release processing eye, this is really either terrifying or exciting, depending on how you want to look at it, because everything in here is complicated. There's nothing that you can just kind of pump down an aperture and measure it and say, hey, science. And everything has weird shapes, everything is blended together. The difference in the kind of scale of the image or the complexity of the image processing problem is just kind of so much greater than what we've been dealing with today, which makes it cool and terrifying. In order to address that, we're building a whole suite of science pipelines. This is the horrendously complicated flowchart, which lists all the pipelines, all the inputs, all the outputs, etc. I'm not going to try and walk through this in any detail, but I do want to refer you to one document. So this document, LSE 163, which you can find at this URL. This is what we call the data products definition document. This defines and describes all the science data products that LSST will produce. So whether it's useful at this meeting or whether it's just useful in general, all the jargon that people throw about when we talk about sources and objects and dia sources and SS objects and whatever else that people are telling you that LSST will produce, or when you actually want to know what we're really going to put in those alerts or whatever else, this is the place to go and look. So your LSST VM reps, people like Mario and Leanne, will kind of help you interpret and understand and potentially push changes on us to make LSE 163 more useful for you. But this is the canonical source that you can always look at and then refer to and understand what it is that we're actually doing. In order to generate all those data products, I'm just going to wave briefly at this kind of pipeline flow chart to get you some sort of orientation. basically we take in all the data that's coming off the telescope. We take in the raw images and the metadata and calibration data and external catalogs, etc. And we stick that into what we call single visit processing. So this is when we get an image from a single visit of the telescope, one pointing at one field. We bring that in, we do instrument signature removal, things like getting rid of cosmic rays, and basic photometric and astrometric calibration. That gets us what we call a processed visit image. And then with those processed visit images, we send them down these two kind of paths. We do the data release processing. We take those PBIs and we co-add them to make super deep images. We do our source finding on the co-added data to get us the deepest possible catalog we can reach. And then we perform what we call multi-epoch characterization or multi-fit. So this is rather than doing our kind of fundamental shape and flux and so on measurements on the co-added data, which is losing a signal, we're taking a model derived from the co-add, convolving that with the PSF on each individual exposure and kind of fitting the whole stack across this 800 odd images simultaneously. This then generates the deep and exquisite object characterizations that you get in the annual data releases. But we're also doing the prompt processing, which is what's carrying on in this kind of right-hand branch here. Here we're taking those PBIs, we're differencing them with deep coads, which we call templates. We're running a source finder on the difference for each of those images. And that gives us what we call DIA sources, which is sources detected on difference images. We're looking to match them up with either known solar system objects or known extrasolar objects. For the solar system objects, we're pushing them off into the MOPS, the Moving Object Processing System, which Mario is going to talk about next, I think, now. And for everything that we're detecting these different images, we're generating and distributing alerts.
And I just wanted to point out that's
That is also true. So everything that we do as a part of prompt processing, with the exception of actually sending out the alerts, we will redo as part of the annual data release. The assumption being that when we're doing the annual data releases, we will be able to do a better, more thorough job of things like photometric calibration than we can do in kind of real time in this prompt processing mode. And certainly by the time we're reaching year 10 of the survey, we've just got a lot more data to base that calculation on. So we will redo all this and we will make available all the prompt processing information as part of a data release. Although obviously we're not going to send out alerts saying 10 years ago we saw a transient.
sorry, and I just wanted to make it clear because it's really important to us that the MOPS processing at data release would probably be a little bit different than they're today. And I think maybe Mario would be heard. I don't know when you get to.
I think I'm assuming that Mario is handling all MOPS things because I know nothing.
I just wanted to make sure that was like trickling through already. That it's a little bit different, and that's where you would do your population catalogs coming from the annual data release.
I think it depends on what happens with MOPS and also all the products. So you may be able to do it on parts of it that are on the same thing. So it depends. I think.
I'll
but I think
discuss some of that, but I would urge everyone not to think deeply about MOPS as in the software, digital software. Think about the product. So think about the specification of what we're promising to deliver and how we get to that product. To those products, they change a lot. Different products, so think about the code.
And that you could have something different at data release.
Yes. Just a quick question.
Mm-hmm.
Your terminology, what's the difference between an object and a source?
So a source is a detection on an individual image, whereas an object is an astronomical thing. So if we
Something known. Something known.
So or something known or something unknown. So if we detect a source on an image that we can't associate with anything known, we'll create a new object to represent it. But object is astronomy. Source is something we found on an image.
But to clarify, and if it's a moving object, it will not have a DAO object
It will
associated with it. It'll have a solar system object, but there will be no DAO object.
My PDF has screwed up again here because it's plastered a banner over this, but I was actually going to walk through this a little bit here, since I assume this is kind of the thing that is of possibly maximum interest to you guys. I was going to walk through the prompt data processing just in a little bit more detail than I did. So you'll have to forgive me that this blue banner is permanently superimposed upon it. And you'll have to know that Leanne's talk is not next, but it's tomorrow. But the idea is that we get our incoming data and we make these process visit images. We difference them against deep templates and we detect DIA sources. So that DIA is difference image analysis and sources are detection on a single image. We measure the properties of those, so we get flux and shape, etc. And we match them against known DIA objects, which are objects that we've seen on difference images that are not solar system objects, and SS objects, which are solar system objects. If they correspond to a solar system object, you get an alert which tells you, hey, we've just seen this, and it also tells you what solar system object we think it's associated with. And similarly, and then we also kind of send this off to MOPS for more processing during the daytime. Otherwise, you get something similar where you're updating a DIA object, and it is not getting sent to MOPS, obviously. MOPS itself, I'm going to skip over because I suspect I'm pushed for time, and Mario is going to tell you all about this, not at 11, but in 5 minutes. So it's hard to give a really good summary of the status of what this code is actually, how far we've got. I mean, I can show you pretty pictures of the telescope and the lenses, and you can ooh and ah and say, oh, that looks nearly done. For the code, this is much harder. So I wanted to just try and give you a summary in words of where I think we've got to. So first, we have this really rich collection of kind of what we call software primitives and algorithms. You can use this now. You can download our code and you can use it to work with astronomical data. It is not kind of like super user-friendly and polished and nice to use all the time, but it is fast and accurate, and we take a lot of pride in like, the ultimate quality of the algorithms that we're implementing, even if sometimes you'll be beating your head against the wall to actually make them work in the way you want. We have these data release processing pipelines. These are not feature complete, but they're already pretty good. For the last years now, the Hypersuper PrimeCam project, for example, has been using these to actually make their science data releases. They don't support all the features that we'll support for LSST data processing, but these are science-grade pipelines that people are using for real science. Alert production is a little bit less mature. We are currently running in this building here with the alert production team. We're running relatively small-scale tests, primarily on DCAM data, but we are pushing on this really hard so that over the rest of this year, I hope that we'll be running much larger scale tests and we'll be running on a much kind of wider variety of data sources. And then the moving object stuff, again, Mario is going to talk about this. At the moment, when you download the kind of LSST software distribution, you don't actually get a version of MOPS, but that will be coming pretty soon.
What about ZTF testing?
We are working closely with ZTF on the alert distribution side of things. So the ZTF alert streams went live a month ago, 2 months ago, something like that, and they are basically based on the technology that we've been developing for LSST. We are not processing ZTF data through the LSST stack. Primarily, we don't think it adds anything to us beyond what we can already get from DCAM and other precursors. In addition to all the code, I just want to point out quickly, data management does other things too. The petascale computing facility that is being built to support LSST data processing and data access is under construction at NCSA in Illinois. This is again coming out of the data management project. There's also a satellite system being built at CCI and 2P3 in France, which will be part of the LSST processing. The LSST science platform, I kind of referred to this earlier and told you the concept, but it's worth emphasizing that this is now actually kind of real. I mean, this is still not the polished system that we hope real astronomers will be using in 4 years' time. But the LSST commissioning team is now working with the kind of bits that form the LSST science platform to actually start using real LSST data or LSST engineering data and start performing commissioning with it. Finally, since I said I would cover all the major LSST subsystems, I'm not in the interest of time going to say much about education and public outreach, but I'm going to point out, I just want to make it clear that LSST regards EPO as one of the 4 major subsystems. It's a huge priority to the project to give non-specialists access to LSST data in an accessible and engaging way. The plans for this are already starting to look pretty cool, and certainly this is something that the project takes really seriously. I totally encourage you all to go and engage with this and get involved with LSST outreach. So just finally to sum up, I wanted to give you a kind of some idea of where we are in terms of actually the overall system being done. If you know anything about LSST project management, you have possibly heard of the earned value system that we use for tracking progress. You may have opinions about whether this is actually a useful way to track progress or not, but it does give us actual percentage complete on everything in the system. So it's worth maybe just emphasizing that the telescope and the camera are now at the kind of 70 or 80% complete level. They're really pushing towards the final straits. Data management, we're a bit further behind, which makes sense. I mean, you can't build all the data management systems until there are telescopes and cameras to get data off. And education and public outreach and commissioning are naturally a bit even further behind that. You can't commission the system until the system actually exists. But all of this, I mean, this is now a project in mid-construction. We're really everything is well started, and many things are really nearing completion at this stage. So I wanted to finish by just turning that into timelines. On here you can see bumps corresponding to all the various things that I've been talking about that we were putting together over the next couple of years, like ComCam being on the summit. But know that we have commissioning effectively, which is this purple streak here, is already ramping up. It's getting serious over the next couple of years. Pre-operations is already starting in early fiscal 19, which means October of this year. Full operations starting at the end of fiscal 22, which means October of 2022. And worth just pointing out that data management development actually continues effectively right up until then. There are bits of the data management system that need to be ready because they will support the commissioning team, and they need to be fully operational on day one. Other bits of the data management system that are being used for producing the annual data release don't actually need to be done until that annual data release is ready to be produced. So we're kind of, the data management timeline can shift a bit later than everything else. On that note, I hope that I have convinced you that LSST construction is on track. It's really impressive to me how much this a kind of deck of slides like this has changed over the last year in terms of now seeing all the pretty pictures of telescopes and lenses and lumps of hardware that have all suddenly started to make it look real. The software is already there. It's not all finished. It's not all perfect. There's certainly still 4 years worth of issues to work out with it. But it's already got software. We've already got software that's capable of doing great science. And so this is a super exciting time to be involved with LSST. And I just wanted to wish you all best wishes for a productive and enjoyable sprint. Thank you. I hope that is all public, otherwise I'm in trouble.
He's letting me record it, so they all know they're people.
Okay.
So we're fine.
I don't think you said this. If you did, I missed it. I'm sorry. You had the faint limit at 24.5 for one image. What signals noise is associated with that?
Ooh.
That's 5 sigma.
Okay. And then the flip side, what is the brightest thing you can see without saturating?
I don't recall the number. Do you have the number of that?
It's about 60 sigma.
Right.
I was wondering if the Hyper Supreme Cam also is a raft of 9 CCD.
No, so the HSC focal plate is a quite different layout. It has, I want to say, on the order of 90 CCDs, although I don't remember the number, but 104, I think. But they're not arranged in rafts on the same way. They're just kind of toppled out over the focal plate.
Going to test some of the software on the first raft on Sky Data. What parts will you test?
So we will do as much as we can as everything effectively. So when ComCam goes on Sky, there will be mini surveys that we will try and operate as close as possible to what a real operations-like scenario will look like. And so we'll try and test everything. There are bits of the code that will simply be ready. So in particular, a lot of the data release processing stuff, things like the multi-epoch characterization, this won't be there yet. But effectively we will be testing everything with Comcam.
Including the alert stream.
We will certainly be I doubt that we will be making alerts available to the community, but we will certainly be generating alerts internally and making sure that it all works.
Yeah, I mean, the problem with testing the alert stream with Comcam is that you won't. I would assume that's sort of.
Eric's talk that's online said that it might be there, but it could be like delayed. So it could be weeks later you'll get it, but they'll start trying to get some stuff out. But it's not going to be on the sort of nominal survey timeline. But like 3 weeks later, they might say that there's a supernovae that they start working. So there will be some alerts they were saying, but not to guarantee or base it, doing science off of that.
Right. So I mean, we will be testing the codes because as soon as we've got anything, even if we are just using the previous visit as a template, we'll run with that and we'll demonstrate that all the machinery works. Actually getting science out of Comcam, I think, is not a guarantee of anything.
I think it would be useful for community users to have alerts that are distributed, even if they are alerts that do not contain any information. But can I ingest that and can I pretend that I've reacted?
Yeah, and I think that. I don't know. Is Eric going to talk about this?
Yeah, I'm not sure. I think basically you can start thinking about that today because we have that running on CTF. The schema is slightly different. But
Yeah, that's
ingesting. That's okay. Right. That's it.
Where does the data from the auxiliary telescope go, if anywhere? Does it just get used internally and then thrown out, or?
It will be available as part of the data release because I think we will make everything available as part of the data release. Other than the fact that we will make it available, I'm not promising that we're going to make it available in any particularly community-friendly kind of way. I mean, it's not one of our core data products that we're making guarantees about. But certainly, I mean, everything that the auxiliary telescope will at least sort of be dumped in a database and available for you if you want.
I'm not sure if you what the telescope is doing. I'm sorry, I'm right. Because I think a lot of people think that the auxiliary telescope, it's not obvious that the auxiliary telescope is.
So yeah, I mean, I think I did say that, but yes, the auxiliary telescope is taking spectra of bright stars that we're then using to characterize the atmosphere. So it's kind of trailing the 8.4 meter around the sky and pointing through the same chunk of atmosphere, but getting a stellar spectrum. Which field of view? I don't know. I'm sorry.
Yeah, because it said spectrophotometric measurements, which I guess is not necessarily what I think of first.
Actually, as far as I understand, it's not spectra, so to understand what the absorption component in the atmosphere. And so it doesn't have to be absolutely calibrated because that comes from the primary telescope.
There's a really nice talk by Robert Lupton on this. So on the LSST website, I think you go to lsst.org/scientists. They have the Project Science Team co-chairs talk, and Robert has one that's all about how they're going to use the auxiliary telescope. So in probably more gory detail than anyone wants to know, but it's a lot of detail about how it'll be used and how they're using it.
What's the status on the software for the spectra reduction?
Yeah, so there's a lot of code. There are not yet coherent pipelines. So we've had a guy at Harvard, actually, Augustin Vionnet, has been working on code to make this happen. He has produced a lot of code, but we have not yet integrated it with the rest of the LSST system. But that's kind of the project for the next year.
I'm wondering about